If you're like me, and I know I am, then you love playing Pokemon. Not just once, but many times. However, I can't deny that Pokemon has always had a replayability problem. Now, the interesting thing about each generation is that it has its own pros and cons when it comes to replayability. And today, I'm going to talk about them. Each generation and their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to replayability. Which generation is the most super effective when it comes to replaying them? Let's find out. Speaking of super effective, do you know what's super effective on YouTube? Liking and subscribing. So click on those buttons down below and give a super effective boost to this video and my channel. Thanks a lot. Generation 1, the OG Red and Blue. The pros and cons to this generation are pretty obvious. The pros are that this is the easiest generation to replay because there are no cutscenes and no incredibly long spouts of text boxes that to this day Pokemon won't let you skip. This means you'll be gliding through the game uninhibited by the story, and your A button will thank you for that. However, with this huge advantage comes a big disadvantage. Gen 1 has the smallest selection of Pokemon to work with in a playthrough. 150 Pokemon may seem like a lot on paper, but you gotta consider a few things. For one, a lot of Pokemon are unobtainable in the game due to being late or endgame encounters. Some can't be obtained in the version you're playing, and some can only be obtained through trading. With all of this taken into consideration, you're going to be using a lot of the same Pokemon on repeated playthroughs. I should know, I played through Gen 1 probably more than any other generation. Another problem is that this is the generation of bad move pools, making the roster of viable Pokemon even smaller. I mean, why use Seadra with its terrible move pool when you can use Starmie or Blastoise? Or many of the other water Pokemon available. Heck, why use anything other than Starmie, considering it's the best water Pokemon in the game by far? And of course, there's a total lack of modern-day conveniences. You don't really appreciate these things until you go back. Here are just a few examples. The limited bag inventory. The fact you have to change boxes manually if one fills up or else you just can't catch Pokemon. The HMs. The fact you can't see what a TM is until you select it from the menu. TMs being only usable once unless you use the missing no glitch. No move deleter. No breeding. Certain mechanics not working, and I think you get the point. Gen 1 is a great generation to go through if you don't want the story to get in the way, and you just want to play. It's just a shame what's there is kind of shallow by today's standards. Gen 2 has the same problem, but a bit less so. There is a few more Pokemon to choose from and more modern-day conveniences, but still carries some of the same problems like HMs. It also brings along its own unique problems. Gen 2 is easily the most boring gen to play through. It may have the most content, but a lot of that content is just too easy. The game wasn't balanced properly because Pokemon actually did something unique and let you do some of the gyms out of order. However, that meant they all had to be around the same level, so while the first few are on the same level as you, the rest you will quickly outlevel and destroy. And that goes double for the Kanto gym leaders, with the exception of Blue. Why Pokemon decided to make the game like this, I have no idea. But it resulted in a group of games that are kind of tedious to play through. If it was more balanced and got rid of HMs, it would be a lot better. Oh, and make more Pokemon available before the endgame. Seriously, why are Pokemon like Murkrow and Houndour only in Kanto? They are Johto Pokemon. Gen 3 is a big improvement from the first two generations. There's more Pokemon to choose from, more conveniences, and the story, while at the forefront a lot more, is not too bad to go through as there aren't any long cutscenes and the story beats are easy to mash the A button through. HMs are still a big problem though, even more so than before, but it's still not at its worst. Honestly, the only thing I hate about replaying Gen 3 is the HMs. Other than that, it's really solid. Okay, granted there's a minor problem with type variety in the new Pokedex. For example, there aren't that many new viable electric types, so doing an all-electric run is kinda lame. Trust me, I tried. But overall, it's the best generation of Pokemon games to replay so far. Gen 4. Oh boy, this is when Pokemon really started being unfun to replay through for me. First off, the HMs. Oh, Arceus, the HMs. Remember I said Gen 3 wasn't the worst when it comes to HMs? That's because it's the worst here. No other Pokemon game has made me curse HMs like these games. There are so many of them, and you have to use almost all of them to beat the game. Speaking of Gen 3 problems that are a bigger issue here, remember when I said that there was a type variety problem with electric types? Yeah, the selection of electric types may have been limited in those games, but at least there was a selection. In Diamond and Pearl, there are I repeat, two fire Pokemon you can obtain, and one of them's a starter. On top of that, a lot of Pokemon are unobtainable thanks to a lot of them being trade evolutions. Electivire, Magmortar, Dusknoir, Porygon Z, and many others. And these are Pokemon that everyone wanted to use. Yeah, when you look at it, Gen 4's Pokedex is shockingly bad for a singular playthrough. All the problems with Gen 1 are here now that I think about it, just not as bad. Also, the speed of this game is really slow. Slow movement, slow draining health bars, slow walking through snow and surfing on water. It's just a slow experience. Even Gen 1 moved faster. Now I know what you're all thinking. Platinum solves all these problems, right? Well, the answer is yes and no. The HMs are still a huge problem, but the Pokedex problem is solved. But now we move on to a Platinum exclusive problem. 2 words. Distortion World. Even the most hardcore Platinum fans hate this part. The story isn't that bad to get through, though there's a lot more text boxes than there needs to be. but the Distortion World part is so boring and tedious even the first time through, it makes me wonder what the Pokemon Company was thinking. It really doesn't add anything besides frustration every time I play it. This, for me, at least was the truly most hated part of any Pokemon game I had ever played through up to this point. Yes, sometimes before there were some tedious parts like Team Rocket taking over the radio tower in Gen 2, but at least you were battling people and not just slowly walking through a maze pushing boulders. I know it sounds like I'm making a big stink over Gen 4, but there is a reason it's the least replayed generation for me personally. I was hoping the remakes would solve all these problems, but we all know how that turned out. So sadly for me, Gen 4 is the least fun generation to replay through so far. Gen 2 may have been boring, but Gen 4 actively annoys me. The Gen 5 games are an interesting case because, well, I've never played them. Yeah, to make a long story short, after Gen 4 kind of disappointed me, I was kind of burnt out on Pokemon, so I took a break. And by the time I came back, the Gen 5 games were impossible to find at a decent price. I've heard they're really good, and I've seen people play through them, but without playing them for myself, I feel I can't comment on the replayability, so let's move on. The Gen 6 games is where I believe the Pokemon games began to get really fun to replay thanks to the amount of and variety of Pokemon you can use in a singular playthrough. Even something as early as the first few routes have a lot of Pokemon to choose from, and I always love doing monotype playthroughs in Gen 6 onward. However, it's not perfect. Sadly, this is also the gen where proper cutscenes are introduced, and since the games are in 3D now, they are longer, slower, and more frequent. And of course, they're unskippable. Even when Pokemon did eventually put a skip cutscene option, it only skips a very, very small selection of them. It doesn't let you skip any of the text box heavy set pieces which make up the majority of the game. Also, HMs are still a thing. But overall, the Gen 6 games are fun to replay for the variety of Pokemon you can get and use. It's honestly the only thing that keeps me coming back to them, despite, how easy they are. The Gen 7 games are basically the same thing except for a few differences. The biggest one being that there are no HMs. Hallelujah! I don't know why it took them 7 generations to get rid of them, but thank Arceus they did. This already makes Sun and Moon way more replayable for me because I can actually use a team of 6 that I want to use and not have an HM slave chilling in the background. But with every new generation, the pros and cons grow bigger. We get more Pokemon and more conveniences, but the story and cutscenes in these games, oh boy, they are the worst so far, and arguably the worst period. These games were heavily criticized for the unskippable and lengthy set pieces that were thrust upon you, making these games a chore to replay through. On top of that, the new Pokemon trials that replaced the gyms were not that fun to go through, even the first time. I'll give them credit for trying something new, as this was the first time Pokemon had ever changed up their precious formula, but it wasn't executed properly in my opinion. I actually like these games more than most people do, but I won't deny that they are a pain to replay thanks to these new issues. The Gen 8 games are a special case because a lot of things surround this game. First off, this was the first game to not have every Pokemon available through the National Dex. Even after the paid DLC, there were some Pokemon that just weren't available. Now, during a normal playthrough, that's not much of an issue. After all, the National Dex was something you just got at the end of the game. But I still think it was stupid that people had to pay to get more Pokemon when they didn't need to in any other generation. There are also a ton of unskippable set pieces. Oh, my favorite. However, and this is going to sound weird, it's not that bad here, and that's for one reason. The game is really short. You see, the problem with Sun and Moon is those games were really long, even without the cutscenes. The cutscenes just added way more time and tedium that was unnecessary. Sword and Shield, however, is short, so even though the game interrupts you more than any other, which is a problem, it doesn't feel as bad because you can plow through the game rather quickly. I've actually played through this game many, many times because of how easy it is to do. I know it may be a bit tedious, but at least it won't take me forever like Sun and Moon. Okay, finally Gen 9. These games suck and there's no reason to replay them. Yeah, I'm sorry guys, but I can't play these games. They're too broken, too unbalanced, too boring, and did I mention they're broken? I have no desire to replay these games whatsoever. They are easily the least fun I've ever had with a mainline Pokemon game, even during my first playthrough. The rushed, buggy, and incomplete nature of these games just make me sick, and if you enjoy them, good on you, but I don't. So, in conclusion, each generation has its pros and cons when it comes to replayability, but none of them are perfect. The ingredients are there, but none of them have all of them to make the best replayable experience. I'd say Gen 3 comes the closest to me for the total package, and I'd say Gen 9 and 4 are the worst for me personally, but I await the day when we get a Pokemon game that is perfect for replayability. What games do you find to be the most and least replayable? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you next time.